Hi, good morning. My name is Filiberto Amati, and I am a partner at Amati Associates in Warsaw. We're here today for our next episode of the series on the future of events. And I'm happy to introduce Marco Bevolo, who's going to tell us who the esteemed guest of today is. Marco, the ball is in your court, and welcome.
Thank you, Filiberto. I'm very happy today to introduce our first institutional expert. We have spoken with a number of high caliber industry experts and leaders. With this dialogue, we open up our research on the future of events to the world of professional associations and institutional organizations. Our guest is Dr. Robert Govers. He's editor-in-chief for Palgrave, for a scientific journal in place branding and public diplomacy, and he is an author, a top consultant on place branding and city marketing and various other issues, a scholar, and basically he is today so kind to join us in his capacity as chairman of the International Place Branding Association. I would like to ask Robert to tell our viewers very shortly, but effectively, as you always do, who you are and what the background of the association is, and what your starting point is in this conversation.
Okay, thank you very much, Marco, for that very kind introduction, and thank you, Filiberto, for having me, both of you. It's a great honor to be part of this. So thanks for inviting me. So yes, I'm chairman. I'm taking part in this conversation as chairman of the International Place Branding Association. So maybe for the viewers, I need to explain very briefly what we mean with place branding. Of course, we mean by that the concept of brand applied to places. So basically, we're looking at mechanisms and ways in which we can influence the name awareness of cities, regions, and countries and their reputations. So let's just call it reputation management for places. So obviously there's a professional field in that area where you have consultants and advertising agencies, communication agencies, branding agencies that do this kind of brand work for cities, regions, and countries. And there's a whole academic discipline that studies the area of what is referred to as nation branding, city branding, region branding, etc. So the overarching association that we have is the International Place Branding Association. So it's the concept of brand applied to places, and then places, of course, referring to both cities, regions, and countries at multiple geographical levels. So what does the association do? It's basically a network of experts that work in this field of place branding, reputation management for places. Most of our members, it's a membership organization, but membership is free. So basically it's just a network of experts. Most of these individuals are academic, but we have some consultants who really focus and specialize in the area of place management and place branding. There are many agencies that do this kind of work, but they don't necessarily specialize in the field. So they do commercial branding as well as place branding. But there are a couple of consultants and advisors and experts also on the client side. I mean, policymakers who really specialize specifically in this field of place branding, and they are member of the association. But like I said, most of them, I would say, are academic, and obviously this is a global network. So I would say we have hundreds of people on our mailing list, but if we look at our activities, which is mainly conferences, trying to bring people together, sometimes online stuff, online events or seminars, and we've also set up an academy now, which we're going to talk about later. But if we look at the number of people that's actively involved, I would say that's about 150 to 200 individuals globally. So it's not massive, but it's a significant network, and it's, I think, the network that where both academics, practitioners on the consultancy side as well as on the client side interact and share their experience and their knowledge.
Well, thank you for the extensive introduction. I think it's particularly interesting that the International Place Branding Association has a kind of academic component, practitioners in the consulting field component, and city managers, national marketing, and what have you, the kind of public sector side. So this makes your events really multidisciplinary and almost cross-industry, because from the ambassador to the consultant to the young doctor who wants to present her or his PhD project, all the different articulations at professional and intellectual level that pertain to place reputation are represented. Your
well, that's a very good point, actually, Marco, because indeed that's exactly the reason why it was set up, because it's so multidisciplinary. Even on the academic side, you've got geographers, marketing specialists, international relations specialists, anthropologists. So it's a very broad array of also academic disciplines. And none of these individuals were able to really interact in their specific field at their relative specialized conferences. So the place marketing will be a minute thing at a marketing conference. So, but having the association and organizing an annual event actually brings these people together. So in that sense, it's quite unique.
Well, this brings me to the fact that your flagship event, which is the International Place Branding Association Conference, that is currently planned in Barcelona in December 2021 in presence. Last year this event was cancelled. It's a relatively simple event from an event management point of view, but it's complex in terms of program and in terms of the interactions.
Exactly.
So my question is, you decided as a chairman and as association to call for this conference, this event in presence, and not as 99% of equivalent associations is doing online. What is the rationale for this choice? And is the rationale influenced by the multidisciplinary cross-industry nature of the association?
Yes, both. And you're right. So we postponed it. So we run the event normally annually, but there's always a local host, which is usually university, right? So it was planned for December 2020, but together with the host organization, which is the Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona, we decided, obviously, that we needed to postpone because the event couldn't physically happen. Because of COVID restrictions. But and of course we had discussed the option of doing it online. But you're absolutely right in terms of the complexity of organizing an academic conference. Particularly the programming is a challenge. And maybe I should just again for the viewers briefly explain what an academic conference is and how it's different from other conferences. The whole business model basically is that academics present their research work at the conference. When they do, usually they have to get authorization from their employers, i.e. universities, to use their budget. Of course, they have their own research budget, but they're only allowed to spend that budget on going to a conference if they are actually presenting at the conference. This means that basically almost everybody that attends an academic conference also presents at the conference, which means that you can only organize it in a brief period of time, let's say 2 or 3 days, if you do multiple parallel sessions. So usually you have 2 or 3 plenary sessions with keynote speakers. Sometimes the keynote speakers are at a level that they might attract additional audience besides just the people that are also presenting there. But most of them will actually be presenting in parallel sessions. And what you will see happening is that as the conference progresses into the second or third day, you usually, even in a physical conference, you will see the attendance of these parallel sessions, because imagine this, for 3 days in a row, you've got 3 or 4 parallel sessions taking place most of the time. You see the attendance in these sessions declining, okay? Now, let's say you would do this online. Sure, you could do parallel sessions and then people will choose different rooms, or virtual rooms. One of the benefits of having it physically is that you take people outside of their usual environment, out of their, daily routine, away from their families, if you like, away from their children. So they're actually at an event in a place. So there's a reason. It makes sense for people to actually physically attend than in the room, and not be disturbed by their usual routine. What happens if you do this online? I think you're going to lose everybody in these parallel sessions, because then people are home, they need to bring the kids to school. Well, they don't now, but anyway, there's things going on in the house, there are things going on in their routines. So attendance will be even a bigger issue. If you didn't do parallel sessions in order to try and get more attendees, then you would have to have a conference that lasts for a whole week, because everybody needs to be able to present. So that's a huge challenge. And this is why we said, okay, we're just going to postpone it. We want to keep it physical. And of course, you have to understand that the whole idea of going to an academic conference for academics is a huge part of their job satisfaction. It's a huge part of why they are in the job of being an academic. You have to imagine that these people, year round already, they meet and collaborate virtually, right? Through email, through co-publishing, through co-authoring stuff. So they do online meet. They have done online meetings all the time, but at least this once a year, they all go to this one place and they can physically meet and have dinner together, and they are friends basically, right? Because they have been collaborating for years. They constantly do collaborate, but at least this once a year, you want to have this opportunity to physically meet. So I think it really doesn't make much sense to move that online. We have been asked to finish off on that. We have been asked to do both, so to have the physical conference and then also stream it. But then again, you run into the technical issues of then having multiple rooms with multiple setups, multiple technologies, multiple streaming channels, etc. So I don't think it's worthwhile, the investment and the cost of doing that for the handful of people at the end that will be watching these parallel streams.
Actually, speaking of costs, I would like to discuss with you, because it's very clear the sort of word of academic conferences, that it's also object of the books by David Lodge and by several campus novel writers who describe the professor going to a conference as a kind of very witty narrative topic. But I would like, you mentioned the costs, and I would like to actually throw the ball to Filiberto, asking his point of view on the whole speakers business, because I think all three of us have been quite engaged as commercial speakers or as keynote speakers. Filiberto is being the Polish partner of a major network organization in the field of events until recently. Filiberto, how do you see, Robert mentioned the essential role of in-presence attendance, and he mentioned costs. We have seen a proliferation of virtual events where the monetary value for speakers has, I think, gone to zero for practically everybody. How do you see the commercial speaker side of the equation, Filiberto?
Can I just, interrupt? Because this is again a major difference with an academic conference. We don't pay any speakers.
Exactly.
Right? So of course, there's a huge difference between academic conference and other types of conferences and exhibitions. But I sometimes am invited by governments or for commercial events to speak, but that's a whole different ballgame. But anyway, just to clarify that, we do have keynote speakers, and we will offer them a ticket and free stay, so they don't have to have any expenditure. For them, it's usually an honor to be speaking at the International Placemaking Association conference. But other than that, everybody's there to share their work and meet. So
for a commercial speaker, attending such an event is a badge of honor.
Exactly.
In the portfolio, and then with these badges of honor, the commercial speaker can perform keynotes or seminars at a commercial fee, or he could, or she could. Filiberto, how do you see the duality between these two words, commercial speaker, academic speaker, and how do you like to engage with Robert on the future of commercial speaking?
So I would say that, as in many other aspects, the pandemic, of course, has accelerated a number of factors which were underlying and existing, a number of vectors, which were underlying, and trends which were existing. And in particular, I would say that, excluding, of course, the part of pay for play, which is, basically product placement. It's not really commercial speaking engagements. There's been an explosion of events, which has also created a number of opportunities for people who wanted to launch themselves or using the commercial speaking space as own branding, as own reputation builder. And so more and more people, more and more speakers were available for free. So the trend for me, it's what happens on YouTube. There is a billion content producers right now, massively, but the pyramid is such that probably less than 1,000% of these people earn money. And a handful of those are actually can make a living out of that. And of course, those are the ones who make the millions. I think that in the commercial speaking engagement, there is still a lot of that's going to happen more and more. There is going to be a handful of keynote speakers who have, by the way, research or incredible storytelling capabilities or an ability to see trends before everybody else. And those guys will keep making a living out of it, whether the event is digital or not. But on the other hand, I would say that it's very unlikely that the rest of the pyramid, it's ever going to earn a buck out of it. Me included, probably. But I would say that, and that's regardless of whether the event is physical, digital, or phygital. Probably what also is going to happen at a certain point, because there was an explosion of events. Many pivoted online, but they're also having a hard time to keeping the recruitment significant for these online events. And probably the appetite of companies to sponsor or keynote speakers to travel for events for free, when it's not clear what is their reputation or awareness return, it's gonna fade down and fade out. I don't know whether quickly or not, but that's gonna happen. But I wanted to ask Robert also another question, which is, do you see any utility, or if we reinvent the professional events as such, because I understand the emotional connection, the ability to connect physically, and that's critical. Okay, that's really critical. But Do you see digital technologies playing any complementary role in the future, and what that role would be?
For academic conferences, you mean, or conferences in general?
No, academic conferences.
Academic conferences.
Both. I would say both. So
For academic conferences, I don't know. I find it hard to predict because there's so much incentive for academics to keep the model, because it's for them, it's the way to collaborate. Okay, you want to meet people occasionally. What I think might happen is that the number of academic conferences might decline, but that's also to do with budget. But of course, academics have to some extent an academic freedom, and usually their own research budgets. So it's their personal decision whether they go to an event or not, or whether they put their eggs in more baskets by doing cheaper online conferences versus actually traveling to places. And sometimes they do. Sometimes I hear colleagues or members that attend our conferences that might say, well, I'm not coming this year because the destination this year in terms of flights and accommodation is too expensive for me in terms of, compared to my budget. So I'm going to do another conference which is closer by. But whether technology, whether moving that stuff online will happen. I've seen it happen during COVID. So there are quite a few academic conferences that have moved online. But I don't know, to be honest, whether that has been successful or not. But I really doubt that you will have the level of interaction. I even see it as a speaker, interestingly enough. You mentioned, Filiberto, that everything moved online and there's now an explosion of events, but also an explosion of speakers because everybody's working from home. So, every CEO, every individual, every marketing manager, everybody is now willing to participate in an online event and do it for free because they're sitting there anyway. Of course, that's going to change post-COVID because these people are going to go back to their jobs and they might not have the time and availability to travel and speak that widely anymore. So it's hard to predict what that's going to do. But what I've noticed as a speaker, there's two interesting things. And I've actually discussed this with other speakers, professional speakers that have also moved, to online speaking. And they were all doing, by the way, like myself, doing offline. So I was only doing offline speaking pre-COVID. But what we've seen is that if you were speaking at an event pre-COVID, there would always be a social media consequence. I mean, people would be tweeting about it. There would be things on LinkedIn. So you would see engagement around your talk, around the event. That has gone with online events. So myself and the people I talk to, they've done online speaking. And they said, but when you finish your talk in this online conference, there's nothing happening. People don't tweet about it. So I'm wondering whether people are actually really engaged with the event. And the other thing is, what I've also noticed, I've done seminars myself, and I've heard the same from others, where you get people sign up for an online webinar. They're there. And then the thing is done. So, and you're saying, okay, we're done. You can leave now. And then there's always like 10% that sticks around. Well, of course, they didn't stick around. They've got their Zoom thing on, but in the meantime, they've started doing something else. So they're watching TV or doing the dishes or whatever. And I've kept it on to see what would happen. And it would take 15, 20 minutes for these people to finally log off without never seeing them, because they were just, it was just on their computer, but they weren't attending. So I think the social pressure, if you like, or the social stimulus at real events to be in the room and to participate. Sure, of course, there's still going to be people that are on their mobile phones and doing other things, I know, but there's more pressure, I would say, and more social protocol to engage for most people. So I'm a firm believer that real events have much more engagement than online. But what that's going to do for the speaking business, like you asked, Filiberto, I'm not sure.
Well, I would like to ask you a bit of a provocative question, yeah? Because again, I repeat it as a disclaimer, that the three of us have been in the past also on the commercial speaker circuit. If you were to buy a Maserati because you decided to upgrade your driving to the finest Italian excellence, would you take a loan based on your forecast as a commercial speaker in the next 5 years, or would you buy a bike or a Panda or a Vespa, or would you walk? What would you do in terms of your expectation that the speaker business, the commercial speaker business, still delivers financial sustainability? Because I remember years when commercial speakers, especially before 2008, could easily make 25 or 50,000 euros of speaking engagements. What is your expectation? Is it a business that is going to disappear, or
no,
fade away, or will you?
No, I don't think it will disappear, because you would still need, you know, these people have a purpose, right? The professional speakers. So there's professional speakers that have profile, either generally. I mean, the most expensive speakers are obviously the ones that have global profile. They're celebrities or ex-politicians or ex-presidents, whatever. I mean, they will still be paid extensively for whether it's online or offline. No problem, because of course they bring the audience. And then you have specialists in their field. So if you want to do a real specialist event, how many specialists are there that know their discipline and are also capable of doing a captivating and inspiring speech? So, what happened during COVID and what the consequences of that are, again, like I said, it's really hard to predict, because there have been good online conferences, but there have been shitloads of bad online conferences, and nobody really knows. Some might have been doing post-conference qualitative surveys and satisfaction surveys among the audiences. I don't know. I don't really have insights into those, but I think there will still be a market for professional speakers that are specialists in the field, or that people that can bring audience. And they will find. I think organizers will find that those can't really be replaced, and also physically can't really be replaced with online. And I'm here talking, of course, about conferences, exhibitions, trade fairs, but I'm not talking about regular business meetings or anything like that. Incentives, academic conferences, because in all of those, in those categories of events, the physicality of it, the meeting people physically, the dinners together, the ability to sit at a table with a speaker or somebody who's famous in his or her field, that's all part of the event.
I would like to again play tennis with Filiberto on incentives, because in a way, the level of expertise in the academic conference, in publishing, is extremely high, extremely specialized. But I would argue that there is a real commercial transaction mechanism besides the impact points of the publications, because basically an academic journal, an academic conference works in a context where the business model is already set from the start. When I published an academic book, the price was ridiculous. It was like $130. And I thought, what are they doing? But they are doing the price that academic libraries will pay to acquire one copy. So it's a bit of whether it's the academic bubble that Brian Alexander writes of, or whether it's a sustainable system, this is a separate discussion. But what's going to happen, and that's where I also like to hear Filiberto's points of view as a veteran of various formats of business events in various sectors. What's going to happen to incentives and to the whole milieu of commercial transactions and economic value generation that sustains the event industry? Filiberto, do you have an hypothesis to share with Robert? And then, Robert, could you give us your...
Well, from my perspective, there is a fundamental issue at this stage. There is no clarity what the new reality looks like. Okay, to be honest with you, I'm not even clear on what this interim reality it's all about because it keeps changing. And if you look at US versus Europe, but in Italy, North versus South, there are so many different bubbles. And if this bubbles model works and keeps working and keeps promoting itself and growing, then I think that we're going to have a problem with global events. Because so far, every time that we've been trying to do a COVID-free event where people get tested before several times, they've been tested during, then we always created a super spreader, regardless of, there is no way we can stop it. And we will see how vaccination prevents this from happening. And so I don't know, I'm pretty confident it will, but I don't know. So in terms of incentives, I think that there is going to be, for sure, at least in the interim part, a focus on smaller scale events. More bubbles in the bubble.
Regionalized,
but even you're not going to go to a trade show where there are 20,000 visitors in a week, because the risk is too high.
Well, Filiberto, actually, the experiments done by the field lab in the Netherlands were encouraging on the scale of a business conference or a theater show, but the ambition to test with 10,000 visitors in the city of Breda during King's Day at a party that was a scientific experiment with 10,000 people in the city center was stopped by a civic uproar with a petition online. Also, the Efteling, the theme park attraction in the Netherlands, had to stop a similar experiment. Robert, do you think that in this kind of experiments, new business models for incentives and for the commercial viability of the event sector could be tested as well? How do you see it?
I don't know. I'm not an expert in these tests and the results, but I usually
Sorry for interrupting, but again, would you make a 5 years loan to buy a boat, or would you prefer to swim because your perception of the expected economic sustainability of the incentives and commercial side of events is, let's say...
I firmly believe that it's going to come back. Of course, the question is when. So I fully agree with Filiberto. In the meantime, just because of the conditions of the pandemic, we will be forced to do smaller scale stuff and regionalize it, because, of course, we might be vaccinated. Most Europeans might be vaccinated by the end of summer, but that doesn't mean that the rest of the world is vaccinated. So that completely makes sense. But there's going to be a time when this pandemic is over, surely, if not because everybody's had it, or and everybody who's vulnerable has died. I mean, the Spanish flu went over in 2-3 years. 50 million people died, but it was over. It's sad, obviously, but I believe, be it 1 year, be it another 2 years, but there's going to be a time when this is over. So in the short term, I wouldn't buy a boat, but I wouldn't. I would still keep it on the plans for maybe in 2 years' time, or
Yeah.
maybe it turns out that when we're all vaccinated by the end of summer and there's no new variants that cause problems with the vaccinations, that the thing might actually be over. Who knows? I mean, particularly in some parts of the world.
Well, I like to move to the
No,
real
but
climate.
before we move, Marco, because I think for me, also based on what Robert just said, the key is, can the industry survive? Because
Right.
the industry depends on a lot of subsidized from placemaking actors to leisure, and that creates a lot of smaller catering companies, and then the hotels and whoever offers service to those. So there is a pyramid of small ecosystem players with a huge, vast ecosystem, which is very simple in one way, but it's all subsidized and promoted. Okay, and the thing is that to do an event for 7,000 people, you need to have a number of providers and suppliers to be able to do that. If in 3 years that industry is dead,
Yeah.
you can't really go back to it probably within a time frame of 5 years, because it's not easy to build 200 caterers who can do that business in
Well,
No, fair enough. Yeah.
that's a key difference. The academic conferencing sector can be frozen for 2 years because of the kind of context, organizational context, whereas the commercial side
Sure.
cannot. Although it's going to be very elastic in terms of micro enterprise and so on. Well, actually, thank you for the comment, and this really brings us to the climax of this interview, where Robert, I would like to ask you how you see the future role of events and the event industry, whether it's maybe even an industry of national or regional interest, for the purpose of creating value for the reputation of cities, regions, and nations. So do you think Geneva can be the same without the Geneva Motor Show? Do you think regional or local events can flip over the reputation of places, like to some extent the Dutch Design Week did for Eindhoven 20 years ago? What's your point of view in terms of place branding?
Well, it's a very interesting question, because I think the pandemic might actually be a blessing in disguise, because I'm talking here as an advisor, but also as the chairman of the IPBA, when I talk about this topic with colleagues, but also as an advisor for governments. There's a firm belief that if you want to enhance your reputation as a city, region, or country, you have to do a mega event. So you're going to have to be cultural capital of Europe, or host an Olympics, or host a World Cup soccer, or things equivalent to that. Well, the reasoning is obvious, because of course such an event will bring massive media attention from all over the world, and that media attention will then improve your reputation. Now, in all the data that we have, there's hardly any evidence for that. And what is the reason is because people are not really interested in who's hosting when it's a Olympics or a World Cup soccer. And people soon forget who was the last host. And I do this test, by the way, with audiences and students. I ask them, over the last 6 World Cups and the last 6 Olympic Games, who were hosting it, and they have no idea. They literally have no idea. I mean, there's some guesses when maybe it was Athens, but can't really pinpoint which year, which place. And the problem is that they're so massive, these events, that all the attention and all the resources and all the effort goes into making the event a success. And of course, the idea is that if we just can organize a successful event, then we'll be famous. Now, nothing is closer to the truth, because it's like a hygiene factor. To have a successful event is a hygiene factor. Of course, the event needs to be successful. If it's not, then you're going to really be in deep shit. But having a successful event doesn't necessarily mean that it's then going to stick to your place. What my advice to clients is you need to use, if you are going to do a mega event, you need to see them as a means to an end. The event is not the end in itself, it's a means to an end. You use the event to build your reputation. So what else, besides hosting a successful event, are you going to do to show the identity of your city, your region, your country, to reflect the value of brand values, and to use the event in order to gain reputational value? There's only one example that I'm familiar with where that was successful, which is 2006 World Cup soccer in Germany, and they actually used the World Cup in Germany to enhance the reputation of the Germans as, you know, friendly people, hospitable country, etc. Because they saw that they are very strong in certain areas, of course, when it comes to exports, when it comes to governance, and they have a very strong reputation. But when it comes to the Germans themselves, the friendliness and, you know, the sense of humor of the Germans, they had a challenge. So they specifically made the World Cup in such a way that was addressing these challenges, and they set up all kinds of initiatives like. These things have now become common practice, like fan zones in participating countries. So when you can't actually go to the game, you can go to your local city and watch the game there and still get, you know, engagement. Inviting foreign police officers. So that when there was a game, you would have, where Holland is playing Italy, you would have Italian and Dutch police officers. Well, these were all things, huge diplomatic challenges, obviously. But the Germans invested in those. Some of these things have now become common practice, but that's the only example where I know that was successful. Now, so what I would advise clients to do is, it doesn't have to be a mega event. If you do a small event, but it's imaginative, it's something that for people saying, hold on, there's something interesting happening here. What's that? That might even enhance your reputation much further than a mega event does. Examples are the Tomatino, right, or the Bull Run in Pamplona, right? So they only allow a couple of hundred people in, or a couple of thousand. Because just of the scale of the place, it can't, you know, have any larger audience than that. But it's massively popular, and people know about it around the world because they're so particular, right, and they're so linked specifically to those places. So the pandemic might actually be a blessing in disguise, in the sense that it's going to push places to be more creative, more imaginative, more original in the smaller things that they will do, but do them in such a way that they actually get reputational benefits.
And if I may, I think that for me, a great example of that, it's what you just said. It's the role of South by Southwest for Austin in Texas, because
Exactly.
It was a small but very well defined and unique platform, which grew in time and massively changed the economy in the city, because it finally made it possible for companies, tech companies, media companies to think beyond Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And in fact, actually changed the local economy, but probably it also allowed for this massive output of resources and companies outside California. They created a new tech realities all over the United States.
It's a good example.
And I think that it was very focused. Then, of course, it grew as well, because now it's media. It's, booze companies goes and launch their new brands or new lines in South by Southwest. Tech, and I think that's the kind of example. You shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. You should dilute it in time and be focused, probably.
Yeah. Yeah, if you can have a focus, when we're talking about place branding, if you have a focus in terms of how you want to position yourself, and you've got clear narratives in your mind of what the place wants to become famous for, then you could have a succession of smaller scale but on brand, so positioning, reinforcing events that, and if you do them in imaginatively, if you create them a twist, if you make them specific to the place, and it also resonates with locals and local industry, like Austin's South by Southwest clearly does. I mean, it was actually the music industry that pushed for the event initially, because they felt that even though it's a music city, they felt that they didn't get the reputational value that they deserved. And then do multiple initiatives that are quote unquote on brand.
Yeah. Well, actually, you mentioned the World Cup in Germany. I can recall in my hometown Turin, in Italy, Torino, we are a bit the Germans of Italy, well, not for the food, but for the weather and for the better reputation in terms of humor and character. And I remember at the Olympics of Torino in 2006 were a magic moment of mobilization of people being volunteers, being hosts. It was a kind of an industrial city opening up to become a destination city. In these terms, and I have two questions here. I have here your latest book,
Thank you.
Imaginative Communities, of which I wrote in the past on the Journal of Tourism Futures. And in your book, you explain how it is fundamental that the community gets imaginatively involved and mobilized. So my two questions are, your contributions to the discipline include publications, service as editor of Place Branding and Public Diplomacy Journal, but also academic commitments. The two questions are, how do you think that this imaginative community involvement will develop in the framework of eventful cities, as defined by Greg Richards and Hans Momas, and how will the International Place Branding Association promote the knowledge and the understanding of city marketing, place reputation, to enhance this kind of professional field, to enable these interpretations to be leveraged?
It's a very good question. Thank you, Marco. I think I'm hoping that because of the pandemic, the pandemic could go two ways. The post-pandemic era could go two ways when it comes to place. And what I'm really afraid of is that there's going to be, by governments, a lot of focus on short-term promotion in order to bring back business as soon as possible. And if everybody starts to do that, just today it was in the news that, for instance, Malta is paying parts of hotel rooms when people come visit Malta now in order to stimulate tourism. It doesn't seem to make any sense to me. It's not because people don't want to go to Malta and want to go somewhere else that the rooms are not filled. It's because people are afraid to travel, or are not allowed to travel, or are still waiting for how this pandemic progresses, and they might be doing last minute. So, this is a race to the bottom. If to do these types of promotions, it doesn't seem to make any sense. But still, I can understand that governments, of course, being pressured by local business, by the local event industry, hospitality industry, being pushed to do something because we need to bring back tourists. The easiest thing to do is to then just sponsor it, or do discounts and promotions. But for me, that's a race to the bottom, because everybody else will do it, and everybody will just get fewer income. And people, as soon as they are able to, will travel anyway. So I'm hoping that there'll be a much longer term perspective, and I see it happening with places like Amsterdam, Barcelona, places in Flanders, here in Belgium. So those places that were suffering from over tourism pre-COVID have actually been taking this break to think about what kind of tourism do we really want in the future, or what kind of business, what kind of expats, what kind of events, et cetera, do we want in the future, to really make this into a more strategic issue, in order to find ways in which we can engage with the world, be it through tourism, be it through events, etc., in a way that matches what a place is about and the locals, as well as the potential audiences, as opposed to mass customization and just being everything to everybody. So I'm hoping that the latter, the second future, will be the one that we're going towards. Now, the Ipba Association, I think people write about this, and most academics would agree, I think, with me on this perspective. But as with any discipline, there's always a huge gap between, of course, the academics and what they write, and a journal like the Journal of Place Branding and Public Diplomacy, and the kind of publications that policymakers and the people in charge read. And this is a big challenge. And of course, governments are being advised by advertising agencies and commercial agencies, and they are in the business of selling advertising space some of the time. That's where they make their money. So, you know, to some extent, I'm skeptical, but I really do hope that, and there is some light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to where you see some places really reconsidering their futures. And this is maybe one of the benefits of this over-tourism thing that there was a big discussion about over-tourism pre-COVID. And it might actually be a good thing that finally now places are starting to take tourism and the impact of events and tourism seriously and rethink their futures.
Filiberto, I would like to involve you from the side of how professional training, vocational education, and in general the entire non-academic sector of education plays or does not play a role. The International Place Branding Association is launching a vocational education service. I would like Filiberto to bring in your point of view as a trainer and as an organizer of these kind of activities, and to waiting on what works, what not, what will work and what not in the future, so that Robert might react and present by reacting this other initiative of the IPA. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Filiberto?
Well, I think that in the future we will see a much more hybrid portfolio of trainings, online versus offline, hybrid type of events as well. Overall, I would say that people are going to travel far less for training, or less often, okay? Because clearly it's not feasible to organize. I remember when I started my career in Procter & Gamble in Brussels, I was sent to do a training in Cairo. And there basically we had people from 15 different countries flying there, because that's the way it used to be. Yeah. I think that moving forward is not going to be economical. It's going to be less often. It's going to be happening when, going back to what Robert was saying earlier, the social networking component becomes dominant. But then probably there are going to be events specifically decline for that purpose, and it could be in certain cases that all the training lose that component and focus on the training itself, and then that component is going to get delivered in a different pillar, yeah, not through the learning and development function. So I would say that from my perspective, a lot of it's going to be training, but it depends as well on the type of training. With BOMA in Poland, but elsewhere, everywhere else in the world, a lot of what we do, it's about doing things together for the participants. And that requires, it can be delivered online, but it's much more effective when you deliver it with the, let's say, physical component.
Yeah.
So I think that, yeah, there is going to be a broader portfolio of options in that sense.
Robert,
No, I fully agree with that.
I would like to only you to react from 2 points of view. The point of view of formats, where you also have a commitment, an academic commitment in Rotterdam in higher education. So what kind of format for higher education and professional training you envision as future proof? And from the point of view of content, to conclude the interview, how does the International Place Branding Association Academy plan to work on the improvement of the knowledge in the sector to enable the change towards imaginative place branding that we commented?
Well, the two are related, and I fully agree with Filiberto that, and when it comes to, so I'm not so sure about the events business in general and whether things are going to move online, but I'm quite certain that indeed in education and training, I think COVID we'll see that in a few years' time that the pandemic will have had a significant effect in order to change the models, and it just makes complete sense. As you mentioned, Marco, I'm also teaching and supervising students in Rotterdam, but also in Milano, in Torino. I used to teach I've taught in Tsinghua University in Beijing and in London. Now, all of that, or most of that, particularly my engagements in the Netherlands and Italy, have moved online. And pre-pandemic, pre-COVID, that discussing the option of doing it online was not an option, right? So when one would suggest, can we do it, online in terms of as opposed to in the classroom, so I don't have to travel? No way. Teaching is done in a classroom. It's got to be on campus. The students are on campus. Period. And obviously, that has completely gone the other way. And I think it will stay there. So of course, there's going to be, like Filiberto, we're going to go back to also physical meetings. But we are going to weigh up the cost of travel, the need for really everybody to do the CO2 emissions, to fly to a location for what? Right. So for some things, we'd say, okay, if you want to have an in-depth discussion about a topic with students, you want to be in the same room. But if you're going to deliver PowerPoint slides, which by the way, I'm not advocating because I'm dead against. Well, because of course, what's happening now is that lecturers and professors are now recording themselves talking to PowerPoint slides, and they say, well, why do I have to do it again? I'll just send them the recording. Now that, of course, to me, that doesn't make any sense. But anyway, so there's going to be really a rethinking of formats and what needs to happen where and when. But it is actually because the whole education ecosystem moved online that we in the IPBA thought, okay, so this is the moment that we can set up our own online academy. Like I said, we're global, which also means that our potential clients, student delegates or participants, are global, which is true. So I'm going to start the first course in a few weeks, and we do it small groups, so we actually can have an online discussion. As you will know very well, of course, if you're doing it online, it becomes even more difficult to have a real discussion if you're with more than, say, 10 people. So we do small groups, and they're literally from all. We've got people in the Americas, and we've got people in Japan and New Zealand, so all across the time zones, which makes it another challenge when to schedule the session. But we're able to do it. But and indeed, the academy, of course, we're hoping will be a mechanism through which the knowledge that is in the IPBA network can be spread to practitioners. And the first course we've got out of 10 people, 2 academics, but the rest are actually practitioners. So, but it's small scale, and of course, we're hoping to expand it and have multiple courses. But that is the benefit, I think, of education moving online.
you would see the IPBA Academy more as a sort of multiple knowledge points that connect to each other on the basis of networking, more of a facilitation than a top-down academic institute where the top expert is going to tell the story of what it is, what it will be, and so on. Do you see it more as an interaction, a facilitation, or more as a classic academic structure?
No, it's certainly not a classic academic structure. It's very flat. I mean, so the association, like I said, is what, 100, 150 active members. We've got a board, and then the board plus other members are facilitating the training sessions, and delivering the content. So in that sense, it's partly classical education, but it's extremely flexible and certainly not top-down and interactive, small groups, particularly because we envision that it will remain online, which doesn't mean that we could have summer programs on location, or because there's other challenges, because we're now discussing with one of our board members is a professor at Tsinghua University in Beijing in China, and she's been looking at getting Chinese to come to the course, but of course you get into language barriers, and all of that. I know that there are solutions to that online where you could have intermediate translation and stuff, but they are saying, well, in that case, maybe it's better to do it in China, specifically for Chinese audience, and then probably physically, where you can have simultaneous translation in the room. So there's so many ifs and buts, but again, I do think that the pandemic has opened up the route for education to use multiple formats and really start thinking about what needs to happen where and how, and whether online or offline and on location.
I really like to thank you on behalf of Amati and Associates, and for the sake of our long-lasting intellectual dialogue that I cherish and appreciate so much. And I would like to give it back to Filiberto for his closing remarks.
No, I just wanted to thank you both. It was a very interesting conversation. I hope it's going to be the first of a series of future chats. I really like the idea that we explored here of how the possible futures could be, and hopefully we all become more responsible in building them, by the way, because that's the other
exactly
dominant. So Robert, thank you very much. It was really great to have you. Marco, thank you very much. And gentlemen, my pleasure. And I look forward to speaking to you in the future.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.